Thank you, Marty. Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you could join us here on this fine 3:30, no matter where you are joining from. Hopefully, it is fine. It is a fine day. My name is Tanika Canardo, and I am a professional learning specialist with Keep Indiana Learning, a department of CIESC here in Indiana. And I'm very glad that you could join us for session 2 of Understanding Language Access. It's our virtual speaker series, and we have Sarah Attalla here with us today. And she is our presenter. She'll be talking about what bilingual staff need to know if they're asked to interpret in a school setting. And so I'm really excited about this topic. Last week, we had a great time. I took so many notes, I had so many thoughts and was able to glean from a lot of the things that Rita and Hector talked about. And so, Sarah, we're looking forward to you today. We should have more people joining us today. So as they join, just kind of scoot over in the Zoom room and we'll just welcome everybody in as they come. Couple of housekeeping things. If you're registered for the speaker series, if you registered at one time, you are all set for the month. And then it's not too late. So if you have friends who would like to register, colleagues who would like to register, you're like, girl or sir, this was great. You should join us next time. Then please just encourage people that they can still sign up and register. It is for free. If you're unable to make any of the sessions, or it was so good that you'd like a replay, then you can re-watch or replay any of the sessions or watch later if you cannot make them. Any of the sessions, they are recorded. And so they are put on a YouTube playlist on our Keep Indiana Learning channel. And it is actually the link is in your reminder email for registration. So you can find it there. Marty is reminding me that you can also get a PGP certificate for joining us in these speaker series sessions. So if you want those PGPs to renew your licenses, then you can fill that out. That link is in the chat and you can fill that out and get your certificate. Lastly, there will be question and answer time at the end. So Sarah will prompt everyone to put any questions that you may have or any comments along the way. Please interact in the chat as much as you want, but you can ask questions in the chat towards the end and she will prompt you to do that. And we'll just have a question and answer session at the end. I think I covered everything. Sarah, we are ready for you, and I'm going to go ahead and scoot over and give you the floor.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tanika. I appreciate it. And to kind of piggyback off of the last point that Tanika made, in addition to being as interactive as you guys would like to in the chat, I also want my presentation to be less of me talking at you guys and more of a dialogue. I'd love to be able to have your participation at different points along the way. So please feel free to interact and participate. It just makes the learning environment a lot richer and it makes things a lot more fun. So thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited. We're going to have a lot of fun together. To kick things off, Tanika already introduced me, but what I would like to do is learn more about you guys, right? So Marty, if you wouldn't mind, could you go ahead and launch the poll? Okay. So if you guys wouldn't mind, please take a moment to fill out the poll and answer these two questions, just so that we can get a better idea of who we have here in the group. And Marty, we can give it a minute or so. I think we had maybe one or two people that just joined. We're just filling out a 2-question poll currently.
Hey, Batman is here. I'm very excited, Sarah. I love
I'm
that.
super excited. I was really hoping Batman would show up.
And for the record, I'm going to start using that on all my polls. So thank you for the brilliant idea. I will give you credit from now on.
Thank you so much. If we learn nothing else from the session. Awesome. So maybe let's give it another 10 seconds and then we can go ahead and close it.
All right, I'll go ahead and close it now.
All right, so wow, That's 4 even quarters. That's interesting. So we have quite a few Batman. We have some administrators, classroom teachers, dual role employees, novice, intermediate, and 50% of us have interpretation as an everyday thing. That's super cool. So it seems like we have a very evenly distributed group. So I think we're going to have a whole lot of fun together. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Now, if you guys have been reading the news, you guys will know that we have had some very questionable weather here in Southern California, which is where I'm located. So hopefully the internet will cooperate. But if at any point in time I freeze or you guys can't hear me, please let me know. I don't want to just continue talking if you guys cannot hear what I'm saying. All right. Can you guys see my screen now? Perfect.
Sure can. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. Okay. So just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Vermont. Now I'm in Los Angeles and I lived in Central America. So from a climate and weather perspective, I've kind of run the gambit. I've been a professional interpreter for over a decade. I'm nationally certified as a medical interpreter by both of the certification bodies, and I'm an interpreter trainer. And Lord willing, I will be graduating with my master's in interpretation and translation in May of this year. So I am super excited for that. It's been a long time coming. Thank you guys so much for participating in the poll. Um, it, I really appreciate your participation. So I'm the kind of person that I like to know what to expect. So I wanted to just run through a few goals that I have for this webinar and for our time together. And the first one is I want to help you, those of you who are dual role employees, I want to help you guys become more well-equipped interpreters, right? I want us to be able to kind of level up our interpretation skills and knowledge when it comes to code of ethics, standards of practice, things like that. On the flip side, it's kind of two sides to the same coin. I want, by teaching you how to become a more equipped interpreter, a better interpreter, this will also help you on the other side of things when you are called upon to work with an interpreter of another language, right? Because you will be experiencing this from an interpreter's perspective. And so therefore you will know how to better work with any interpreter that you need to partner with in the future. So that's goal number one and number two. We're also going to, like Tanika alluded to, we're going to consider some challenges that dual role employees face when they're called upon to interpret. And then I'd like to briefly brainstorm, different processes or ideas that school systems could maybe think about or implement to support dual role interpreters in the work that they're called upon to do. So if all of that sounds good to you guys, then we will go ahead and get started. So I know that half of you have interpretation as like a day-to-day thing for you, and which means the other half do not. So just so that we're all on the same page and we have kind of the same foundation, let's just do a little bit of interpretation 101. So can anyone tell me, if you want to unmute yourself and tell me, what is the food pyramid? Can anyone tell me what the food pyramid is? Does anyone see the food pyramid?
Yes, the food pyramid is the image that allows you to know what amounts of different foods to eat to help your body in the way that is most beneficial.
Exactly. Thank you, Tanika. And a follow-up question for you, if you don't mind. So what are some of the foods that are, like, how is the food groups distributed? What are some of the ones on the bottom versus the top? Do you remember?
Oh yeah. So the fats and the sugars and the things that are fun are in the smaller amounts in the top of the pyramid. And then down below, you have more of like the grains and the dairy, and the meats are kind of sometimes in the middle, or the fruits and vegetables are usually the bigger amount. But then in the middle, you have the dairy and the meats and the grains and stuff like that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for refreshing our memories. So essentially what Tanika is saying is, okay, this German chocolate cake that I love so much, that I want to eat my weight in every day is at the top. Why? Because it's something that I shouldn't be eating my weight of every day. Whereas I shouldn't expect that the carrot I ate last week to still be, having any benefit for my body, because I should be continually eating fruits and veggies, right, on a daily basis, and a lot more fruits and veggies than chocolate cake, right? So the reason I bring this up is because we like to talk about the roles of the interpreter in a similar way. Okay, so the four roles of the interpreter are conduit, clarifier, cultural broker, and advocate. And we lay them out similarly to a food pyramid because these two roles down here, conduit and clarifier, are the ones that are most often used. Whereas the further up the pyramid you go, cultural broker is used less often, and the advocate role is used the most rarely. Okay, so this helps us remember what what the four roles of the interpreter are and how often we use each one. So now quickly to go through each one, can anyone tell me what a conduit is? It's a little bit of a technical term, but we've probably heard of a conduit. Does
Is it
anyone know what a conduit? Uh-huh.
is it a pass through maybe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, so think of it like a pipe. Okay. So we all have plumbing, right, in our homes. So the purpose of those pipes or those conduits are to carry water from point A to point B, right? So like Marty was saying, it's like a pipe. Now, Marty, let me ask you a question. That pipe, that pass through, let's just say it's carrying water. Is it supposed to take anything out of the water or add anything to the water? Is it supposed to change the water into Fanta, orange soda?
Nope, it's supposed to just let whatever is going through it continue on through it unimpeded.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So the conduit role for interpreters is exactly that. We are supposed to carry the message that's spoken from point A to point B, from the language that it's originally said in to the language that the other party understands. Okay, but we need to preserve the integrity of the message, like the conduit that doesn't change the water into Fanta, right? We need to preserve that message without adding anything, without taking anything away from the message, and without changing anything. Sounds pretty simple, but in practice, and those of you who do interpretation every day know that it's a lot easier said than done. But this is the conduit role. This is what we typically think of when we think of interpretation. And it's the most commonly used, which is why it's at the bottom. Going up to clarifier, interpreters can't interpret something they don't understand, whether it's a term that you're just hearing for the first time, or maybe the family uses a colloquial or a slang term from, where they're from that you're not familiar with. In either case, we can't interpret the message of something we don't understand. So this is when we need to step into the clarifier role, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's when we say, this is the interpreter speaking, I'm not familiar with this term. Could you explain it differently? Could you use an alternative word, um, so that we understand the message that's being said? And once we understand it, then we can go back to the conduit role and pass it through to the other language. Moving on up, cultural broker is a specialty type of clarifier. It's essentially when you as the interpreter think that there could be a cultural component that might be influencing the communication and mutual.
Oh, you froze, Sarah.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, did it freeze? It
You're
froze
good.
for a few seconds. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. If need be, I can always not have it in the slideshow format and just, have it outside of slideshow view. That might help. But
Well,
thank you for letting me know.
Marty also said you can turn off your camera, so we can try that if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Let me know if that helps. So cultural broker, like we said, is just a specialty type of clarifier when it comes to the cultures that are at play. Now, one thing I want to mention here is when we think of culture, a lot of times we just think of the family's culture, their background, where they come from. And that's part of it, certainly. But also on the other side of things, the education system here in the US is a culture of its own, right? There are so many procedures and protocols and regulations and hoops to jump through that our families are probably not familiar with, that we ourselves are not always familiar with, right? So it's culture on both sides. Now, last but not least, we have the advocate role. And the advocate is up at the tippy top because it's the one that we want to exercise the most caution when using, because the advocate role is kind of stepping out of the traditional interpreter role and speaking on someone's behalf. So let's just say a student, we know that a student has a life-threatening allergy, and we're going through the accommodations that at an IEP meeting that the student might need, and nobody's mentioning the life-threatening allergy. Just for whatever reason, everyone's kind of forgetting about it. As the interpreter, you might think to yourself, okay, this puts the child potentially gravely at risk. So, I'm no longer interpreting, I'm speaking up, as my own person on behalf of the student to mention, hey, I think that, you guys are forgetting this life-threatening allergy. Okay, so that's the advocate role. It's when you, as the interpreter, feel that the other person's dignity and or well-being is severely at risk. That's when you would step into the advocate role. But we want to exercise caution when doing that. So if you guys have any questions about the roles of the interpreter, feel free to write them in chat and we will get to them at the end. Okay. So these interpreter roles are addressed largely in the Interpreter Code of Ethics and the Standards of Practice. Now, these Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, these documents, I believe Hector, in his session last week, I believe he shared with the group how to access the document that lists all of the standards of practice and code of ethics. So if you guys don't recall where that is, I think Tanika already released the recording for that, and so you should be able to see that. But we're just going to go through a few of them here. So the main ones we have are confidentiality first. I think we're all pretty familiar with this one. This means that, if you are interpreting for a family, you can't just, go home and be like, oh, such and such student, he failed such and such exam. And I can't believe that, he did that. I've worked so much with him. Like, what's wrong with him? We want to make sure that we are preserving the the privacy of the families that we work with. I think this is something that we're all familiar with, regardless of whether you're a dual role interpreter or not. The next one that we have is accuracy. This goes back to that conduit role, where we're wanting to preserve the integrity of the water that's passing through us as the conduit. We're not trying to add minerals in, we're not trying to take anything out, we're not trying to change it to Coca-Cola, right? So it's this idea that we don't omit what's said, we don't add anything, and we don't change anything, okay? Impartiality. So this is one that we're going to revisit when we start talking about some different challenges that dual role interpreters face. Impartiality means I'm not going to give my opinion on the matter. I'm going to interpret things as they're said. I'm not going to let my own biases or my own thoughts influence, what I end up saying, right? I'm going to be impartial. I'm a neutral party. I'm not siding with any one party. I'm not siding with the school. I'm not siding with the family. In that sense, I'm just there to interpret impartially. Respect. I think in the professional workplace, respect is just something that's expected of us. And it's no different here with the profession of interpretation. We want to recognize that everyone has the right to be respected, and we need to treat everyone as such, even when we're interpreting. Advocacy, we talked about. Cultural awareness, going back to the cultural broker role, we know if there's a cultural aspect that could be influencing the communication or the understanding, unless we have cultural awareness, right? Unless we keep ourselves apprised of, both the culture that is the US education system, as well as the different cultural elements that are common in the student and family populations that we serve. And then the last three, you'll notice they all have professional in there. Professional boundaries, meaning when we're there as interpreters, we're not there as the family's friend. Or now, does that mean that we're going to be rude and aloof and cold? Absolutely not. We want to make sure that they feel at ease, that they feel comfortable, that they feel welcome. But at the same time, if we as the interpreter are asked to give them a ride to their IEP meeting, or to, maybe go with them and interpret for them for a doctor's appointment, because we've interpreted for them a lot of times at the school and they feel really comfortable with us, no, we need to maintain those professional boundaries. And why is that? So that we can remain impartial, right? Because as human beings, the closer we get to people, the harder it is to remain neutral. If we're friends with someone and we need to interpret bad news to them, we're going to be tempted, right, to kind of maybe dilute the message, soften the blow, so to speak. But that's not our role. Right? We're not there to gatekeep the conversation. And then professionalism, this is common to pretty much wherever you work. We need to carry ourselves in a professional manner. And then professional development. This is another one that we're going to revisit when it comes to challenges with the dual role interpreter. This just means, just like you guys in your primary role, you have to do continuing education to maintain your licensure, to be able to move forward in your careers. It's no different with interpretation. And so, as dual role employees, one of your roles is a lot of times interpretation. So how can you better your interpretation? Through continuing education, through professional development, and that's super important. So those are a lot, but basically they boil down to three categories: how we approach our work, how we interact with others, and how we approach our profession as a whole. Now, if you guys have questions about those, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so how do interpreters introduce themselves? Okay, the name that we give to these interpreter introductions is the pre-session. Okay, and the pre-session is based on this standard of practice here that I have right under the title, which says always introduce, so professional interpreters always introduce and define the limitations of their role as an interpreter to all parties in both languages before a meeting. Okay, so introductions we typically think of like, hi, my name is Sarah, like we did at the beginning of this webinar. And that is true. A pre-session is for us to introduce ourselves, right? And that's what we typically think. But it's not just that. It doesn't just stop there. A pre-session is also our way as interpreters of setting expectations and letting the rest of the parties know, listen, this is what I need from you so that I can do my job and interpret the best way possible. Okay? Because like with the medical field, the education field, it's very collaborative, right? We're all there for the benefit of our students and families. So therefore, we need to work together and make sure that we are working as well, as harmoniously as possible to reach that goal as a team. Okay. So this is also something important to remember whenever we flip the coin and you guys are called upon as dual role employees. If you're called upon to work with an interpreter of a language other than your two languages, now you're not interpreting in this scenario, but you're working with an interpreter. So you know from an interpreter's perspective why the pre-session is necessary. So therefore, just make sure that as much as possible, allow the interpreters you work with to also do the pre-session, because it'll just help the encounter move and progress a lot more smoothly because everyone will be on the same page. Now, the pre-session can take a lot of different forms. Different people do pre-sessions differently, include different things. But generally speaking, these are the four main components of a pre-session. And I like to use the acronym CIFE, C-I-F-E, which is why I have those letters in red. So C stands for confidentiality. I stands for both I speak in the first person and also I for impartiality, like we mentioned. Now, when I say I speak in the first person, this is if Lourdes were the family, and she were to say in her language, um, I'm not sure how my child is doing in school. Then I, as the interpreter, would say, I'm not sure how my child is doing in school, as if I'm her. I'm not going to say, she doesn't know how her child is doing in school. Okay. Now, this is important because we want to avoid confusion as much as possible. Okay. So if you have enough people in a meeting and there's enough, oh, she said that she such and such, he doesn't want this, she doesn't want this, it gets difficult to keep track of who you're talking about at what time. Right. And that's not what we want. We want transparency. We want there to not be confusion. We want everything to be clear. The other reason is the transparency that I just mentioned. Transparency means we want the encounter to be almost as if there were no interpreter present in an ideal world. We almost want to be invisible in a sense. Now, obviously, we're not, but the idea here is we don't want to gatekeep the conversation. We don't want to get in the middle of the conversation. Because if we say, she is not sure how her child is doing in school, he wants you to know that your child is doing well in school. We're kind of getting in the middle of the conversation, and both parties are going to be talking to us as the interpreters, not to each other. And that's not what we want. We want to facilitate direct communication between the family and the school staff. We don't want them to direct their speech to us. Okay, so that's why this is important. The third one is flow. Flow just means how you manage the conversation, right? So this can include things like, please avoid side conversations, right? It makes it difficult to interpret when there are multiple side conversations happening. It includes things like, please speak in shorter phrases or ideas and pause frequently to allow me time to interpret. This is so that we're able to retain information better. If someone goes on and speaks for 2 minutes and then stops to let the interpreter interpret, it's a lot more difficult for us as interpreters to retain what was said, and therefore accuracy could drop. Now, we've learned and developed skills and memory retention and ways to help mitigate that drop in accuracy, but it still makes it a lot more difficult for us. So all of that falls under flow. And then the last one is everything will be interpreted. Again, as interpreters, we don't pick and choose what we want to interpret and what we don't want to interpret. No, everything will be interpreted. The conduit role, again, that fundamental job that we as interpreters have is everything passes through that tube, right? Nothing escapes. So everything will be interpreted. Now, one important thing here is, so if everything's supposed to be interpreted, does that mean that I need to interpret literally word for word everything? And the answer is absolutely not. Mostly because if you try that, then your interpretation is not really going to make much sense. Word for word in one language may not have an equivalent in the other language, or you may have to flip words around for it to make sense in the other language. So when we say everything will be interpreted, we're talking about the entire message, the entire meaning. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single word will be interpreted. And it's an important distinction. So hopefully it's clear. So kind of entering into some challenges for dual role interpreters. Okay, so we have impartiality, which we mentioned we're going to come back to. So here, one of the standards of practice is that we should refrain from counseling or advising. Okay, now for some of us, our primary role, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to counsel, we're supposed to advise. That's what we're there for. And so sometimes that can kind of, contradict this idea of, oh, as the interpreter, I'm not supposed to do that. So this can be a challenge for dual role interpreters. Like, my knee-jerk reaction is to counsel, is to advise, is to, interject with what I think should happen. But from an interpreter's perspective, we shouldn't. So this is a challenge that a lot of you, if you haven't faced already, probably will. Another challenge for dual role interpreters is, on a similar line, it's this idea of should I intervene or not? So the standards of practice for educational interpreters does allow for, you guys as dual role employees to intervene if you need to. You kind of step into your primary role in that moment if necessary. Okay. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes you just have to, and it is what it is. So the standards of practice do allow for this. But I want you guys to consider two things when deciding whether or not you're going to step out of your interpreter role in that moment and step into your primary role or not. And the first one is if you need to do this, make sure that you're letting everyone know that you're stepping out of the interpreter role and stepping into your primary role. And you can do that by saying things like the interpreter needs to step out of the interpreting role to share information about our upcoming reading workshop. Okay, this way we're maintaining transparency. Everyone is on the same page. Everyone knows that you're not interpreting this that the family said. The family didn't say this. No, you on your own behalf are speaking up to say this. So you refer to yourself as the interpreter to differentiate your voice from the voice of the other two parties. And the second thing is just make sure you think it through before you decide to, step out of the interpreter role in the moment. Because whenever we do, it interrupts the flow of the interpretation and the conversation. And we want to make sure that we're not just voicing our own opinions when maybe it wasn't necessary. We only want to do this when it's unavoidable, when there's no other option. The next one is professionalism. Okay, so obviously we're all professionals, right? So I'm not saying that you guys are not professional, but one of the aspects of a professional interpreter is we only accept assignments that we have been sufficiently trained, prepared, or briefed for. Now, that's all cool in theory, but in practice, if you're pulled aside to interpret, and maybe you are really the only interpreter resource in that moment, sometimes this can be tricky. You may not have the option to say, actually, like I don't feel like my skills are up to par for this, or, it can be difficult to say that, and because maybe there isn't another option. So dual role interpreters may encounter this, and it may be a bit of a challenge. Okay, so if you guys have questions about or any comments about some of the challenges as dual role interpreters, or maybe any challenges that you guys have faced that we haven't mentioned here yet, please feel free to put them in chat. So we have three different modes or types of interpretation. We have consecutive interpretation, simultaneous interpretation, and sight translation. Okay? Consecutive interpretation is exactly how it sounds. What consecutive means, one after the other. 2 consecutive days are 2 days, one after the other, right? So consecutive is the most commonly used mode of interpretation in education, and it just means the speaker speaks, then pauses, and then the interpreter speaks. Okay, they take turns. Simultaneous interpretation means at the same time, simultaneously. And this means that while the speaker is still speaking, the interpreter is interpreting in real time. Okay, this is more mentally taxing than consecutive in certain ways, but it is also used. We'll talk about some of the times when it's used. The last one is sight translation. Sight translation is you take a written document that's in English, let's say, and then you read it in English, but then interpret out loud into the other language what the document says. So it's taking something written in one language and converting it into something oral, something verbal in the other language. So these are the three modes of interpretation. So I'd like to do an activity with you guys. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Um, and if you guys are able to turn your cameras on, that would be great. If you're not able to, don't worry about it. And for this, what we're going to do, I'm going to turn my camera on and hope that it doesn't mess anything up. So we're going to do a little bit of practice activity with both simultaneous and consecutive interpretation. Now, before anyone protests, it's not a requirement that you know a second language to be able to do this activity. And the point of doing the activity is so that we can, really understand what it's like from an interpreter's perspective to do both consecutive and simultaneous, because it will ingrain it better into our minds than me just talking about it. So what I would like to do is, let me pull up this. We're going to do consecutive first, and these will be quick. What I'm going to do is I am going to read a short passage, and I want you guys to try to remember what I said. And then when I finish, I'm going to ask for a brave volunteer to try to repeat back in English what I said verbatim as much as you can remember. Okay? So if you are ready, I will go ahead and start. Occasionally, there may be individual situations that arise which will be reviewed by a school counselor to determine whether a schedule change is necessary. These changes will be considered by the student's teacher, parent/guardian, and school counselor. Can anyone repeat back, just in English, what I read?
So I got occasionally, and then you lost me. I was with you, and then when I figured out it was too much, then I lost it all.
Yeah, I did the same thing. After the first sentence, I was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Peace, I'm done. Yeah. Well, and that's a temptation for interpreters. And this is why with the pre-session, we say like, please speak in shorter phrases, pausing often to allow us time to interpret. Because at a certain point, your brain kind of starts panicking and you're like, I lost what you said. Rita, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that I was focusing on trying to remember the words and ignoring the fact that I needed to listen to the message. That it's the message that's important, right? Like it's the big picture that's important and not every single word. So that interfered, I think, with my ability to, it would have interfered with my ability to transmit it to somebody.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rita. And that's a good point as well. Did you guys think that it was easy or was it hard?
Hard.
Hard. Mhm.
Hard.
Yep. Yeah, it is hard. It sounds easy when we talk about the conduit role, but it's actually a lot more difficult than we think. Okay, let's do, I know we're running a little bit lower on time, so I want to be quick. So let's do one with simultaneous. So what I'm going to do is keep your mics closed or keep your mics off. And I'm going to read a passage, and I want you guys to, as I'm reading it, I want you to repeat out loud if you're in a space where you can do so, or if not, repeat in your head silently everything that I'm saying as I'm saying it. Again, just English to English. Okay, let's start. The International Baccalaureate Diploma Program is an international pre-university program of study, focusing on global issues that cut across boundaries and emphasizing our worldwide interconnectedness through the in-depth project and discussion-based study of perspectives in literature, language, culture, history, politics, science, math, and the arts. All right, how did we do with that?
I almost finished.
That was easy. I could do that, no problem.
I
Okay.
did it better, but you lost me when you got to like the list of things, and I was like, oh wait, no wait.
You're going too fast.
But I
Yeah.
did it better. I'm with Susan. That was better for me.
Okay. Yeah. So for a lot of people, simultaneous is a lot harder. Now, keep in mind, simultaneous also includes, you know, switching into the other language.
Yeah, I was about
Right.
to say,
In
if I
addition,
was turning it into another language, it would have been bad, really bad.
well, it's a skill like anything else. You just need to practice a lot, and it's something that you can do. You just have to polish the skill, but it's difficult, right? So both are difficult in their own ways. Consecutive, you have to rely on more of your short-term memory. Simultaneous, you do need short-term memory, but it's a little more fast-paced. Okay. So just to get a little taste of consecutive and simultaneous for those of us who do not do interpretation. So just so we have a little empathy for our interpreters, whether we ourselves are interpreters or so that we can advocate for ourselves, or whether we are working with interpreters of another spoken language. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen again. We are almost done with the presentation, and then we will go into Q&A. So this is just, I'm going to stop my video so that we don't lose me again. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an example of sight translation. You guys would, as dual role interpreters, you might be handed a document like this and be asked to, okay, this is in English. Can you read it in Spanish, let's say, or Arabic to the family? That would be sight translation. You're taking something written and you're producing something that's verbal or oral in the other language. Now, sight translation is great when it's something simple, when it's something you've seen a billion times, when it's something short, but beware that if you are asking an interpreter to sight translate a 3-page document that's highly technical, it's going to take them a really long time, and mentally it's going to be very fatiguing. And we're going to get to a couple best practices when it comes to sight translation here in a second. But really quickly, what do we actually do when we interpret? Okay, whether it's consecutive or simultaneous, this is what we're doing. Active listening is step 1, reformulation step 2, production step 3. This is what is going on in our brains every time we're interpreting something. So how many of you guys have kids? Can you raise your hand or thumbs up? All right, how many of us were kids? That should be all of us, right? Yeah. So can anyone tell me the difference between hearing and listening?
You can hear something but not process it.
Yeah, the
So
difference is comprehension.
yeah, listening is processing and understanding.
Exactly. You're paying attention. You're actively participating in what the other person's saying to understand for comprehension. Exactly. That's step one. So this is something that we actively have to do. It's not just, oh, I'm sitting there listening to what the person's saying and it's going in one ear and out the other, right? No, we need to listen for comprehension so that we can do something with that understanding. Reformulation is just we have to flip words around, sentences around for them to make sense in the other language that we're interpreting into. And then step three is production, which basically means what comes out of our mouth and how it comes out of our mouth. Are we mumbling? Are we having a lot of filler words like I don't know, like, or are we mumbling? Are we speaking too fast? Production. We could be the best interpreter in the world, but if no one can understand what we're saying, our impact is less considerably. So this leads me to the final two challenges for dual role interpreters: cognitive load and difficulty with active listening and focus. When we have, it's hard enough to focus sometimes, so just have one role at work. So when you add a second role, it can be difficult to focus on what the person's saying so that we can interpret the message when we have a billion other things, going through our minds that have to do with our primary role. Like, oh, I didn't, revise my lesson plan. Oh, I forgot to restock my classroom with XYZ. And then you kind of lose sight of the interpretation in the moment. Our brain is always are already doing so much to just interpret that adding, that primary role to the mix can make things difficult in these two aspects as well. Last slide, and then we'll go on to questions. Some considerations for our school admins. When possible, if you're setting up a meeting that's going to require your dual role employee to interpret, and you know that there's going to be sight translation or simultaneous interpretation involved, please let them know as soon as possible. It'll help them prepare. Provide them with any documents or resources that will be used during the meeting so that they can prepare and do as good a job as possible. It's not always, it's not always something you can do, but as much as possible, it really helps. Provide a support system for your dual role interpreters whenever they face interpretation dilemmas or challenges or, problems that are unique to interpreters. Maybe designate someone that has experience in the school system that they can kind of talk to and talk through these situations with so that they can learn and grow as interpreters and better serve, the families and students that you guys in your school district serves. Last but not least, as much as possible, allow your dual role interpreters to engage in self-care. Vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, burnout is a very real reality for interpreters that we don't always recognize and we are just now starting to receive training on. So this is a standard of practice for a reason. So when possible, please allow them to debrief, or if it's a difficult meeting, take care of themselves and kind of process. And then please allow them to make an effort to participate in training events or professional development for interpreters. It'll just, again, help them grow in this profession and this second role and help them serve our families better, which is the goal, right? Okay, thank you so much for your attention. Do you guys have any questions? Let's see, let me look at the chat. Can you act in your primary role, a teacher, at the same meeting where you are expected to interpret? So the answer here is kind of twofold, and that's a great question, Rita. The part of the answer is going to depend on what your school district's policies are on that. Because just like different hospitals have different policies on that, different school systems probably have different policies and guidelines regarding that. And if they don't, that is another consideration that maybe something might be drafted so that we have something standardized and everyone kind of knows how to deal with certain things. But let's just say for a moment that it is something that the school system allows. The keys here are going to be transparency, making sure everyone is aware when you are acting as an interpreter and when you're acting as your primary role. right? So that way there's no confusion. I think that's the main thing here. But the other part of this is try to avoid that from happening as much as possible to just mitigate the challenges that we mentioned, specifically the cognitive load. When you're having to kind of split your brain between two roles kind of consistently during a meeting, it's kind of like when you try to multitask and you think you're getting more done, but you're actually just getting trying to do more at a time and getting less done. It's kind of a similar it's a similar thing. So if you can avoid that as much as possible, it's better. But if you have to, follow your school system's policies and guidelines with that. And if they allow it, just make sure everyone is aware that that's happening. But that's a great question, Rita. Hopefully that answered it. Yeah, no, my pleasure, Jennifer. I feel like an activity is worth 1,000 words. Are there any other questions, specifically from those of you who do interpretation? Have you encountered anything? Any comments?
Feel free to unmute or get in the chat. Either one is fine. And I have a child coming home from school that doesn't know I'm on a call. So if you hear her, she's making her presence be known. So I'm going to mute.
No worries. It's nice when they come home from school. So let me ask you guys a question to give others that may be thinking of theirs. When, in your experience, or if you guys imagine, when do you think simultaneous interpretation or consecutive interpretation might be used in your school? What settings, what type of meetings, what type of encounters might require consecutive interpretation and which might require simultaneous? We can get creative. Anyone have a guess?
I am curious about the simultaneous interpretation because as an assistant principal, I always use the consecutive, and I've never had anyone do the simultaneous along with me or a parent or anything like that. So I'd like to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And before I answer you, Tanika, Jennifer says in ACRs, they do consecutive. Yeah, consecutive is going to be the most common. So by default, that's probably the one that's going to be used. Simultaneous is really good for kind of two main types of encounters. The first one being if the school staff is going to be talking like 80% of the time, then it can speed up the um, decrease the amount of time that that encounter is going to take because now the person who's giving 80% of the information doesn't have to stop after every 2, 3 sentences. They just keep going because the interpreter is just interpreting simultaneously. Okay. But that it doesn't work as well if it's a dialogue, if it's a lot of back and forth. It works well when maybe it's like in the medical field when there's a teaching, when the medical professional is talking 80, 85% of the time. It just helps speed up everything for both parties. So that's one type of scenario when simultaneous is preferred. The other one is for larger events when there are multiple languages needed or when there are a lot of people that need the interpreter, right? So like at graduation ceremonies, at sometimes at open houses, like if there's a presentation for, all the different families that want to come. Um, Sometimes we do it for IEP meetings as well. You can do consecutive or you can do simultaneous. And there, for simultaneous, you can either use simultaneous interpretation equipment, which is really cool, or you can do like whisper interpreting. It's called chuchotage, which is where the interpreter interprets simultaneously but keeps their voice low so that it's not like two people competing, the two voices competing at the same time. But chuchotage only works when you have like one or two people that need the interpretation. Because if you have 30 people that need the interpretation and you're whispering, only one person's probably going to hear the interpretation and doesn't do any good. So you would need the interpretation equipment for that scenario. But those are kind of the two main types of encounters when simultaneous might be preferable. Does that make sense, Tanika?
Yes, and I was thinking about those very examples. I've been places where there's a large group setting, and then like in a doctor's office when it's like they don't have time to like stop every time. But I know that I have used the consecutive, and some other people said like ACRs. That's exactly right, or parent teacher conferences, and yeah.
Yeah, because those are more dialogues. So consecutive makes more sense. With simultaneous, though, keep in mind that it's more mentally fatiguing for the interpreter, which is why a lot of language service providers try to send two simultaneous interpreters if it's going to be a longer event to preserve accuracy. That way they can switch off every 20, 25 minutes. Because studies have shown that accuracy decreases sharply after about 20 minutes of simultaneous. These were all great questions. But Tanika, that was all that I had. It seems like we have about 3 minutes, so I can turn it back over to you if you have any final comments.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was just jam-packed with so much great information. I appreciate it. It was great just listening and hearing and seeing all of your images. And just a few reminders for people who joined later that did not hear all of my earlier reminders. If you haven't registered, or if you have registered for any of the events, so that one time that you registered, it counts for all of the sessions this month. So you're all set. Also, if you are looking for any of the recordings from last week and then this week with Sarah, then they are added to our playlist on YouTube for Keep Indiana Learning channel. So you can find those already on, or already from last week. Give us a little bit of time for this week for them to be uploaded on the playlist, and that link is included in your reminder email. You also can fill out the certificate on the link that's provided in the chat to get any type of PGP certificates that you need for license renewal. And I believe that is all of my reminders and announcements. Please join us next week, same time. We will be right back here for session 3 of our virtual speaker series for understanding language access. Are there any other comments or anything that we want to say as we close out, Sarah?
Not on my end. Just thank you so much again for the opportunity. I'll put my email address in the chat in case anyone thinks of any questions at like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I forgot to ask.
Yes.
Or maybe that only happens to me.
No, well, yeah, I might have some thoughts about language access. I'll hit you up at about 3. Thanks, everyone. And I will hopefully see you and a friend next week here, same time on Thursday.